Hi, you guys. This is Miss Tao. Today we will be learning about Mesopotamia's innovations and inventions. And before we go into detail, we need to revisit what is innovation. We learned this about a couple weeks ago. An innovation is a creation, development, and the planning of a new or existing product, process, or service to improve efficiency and effectiveness. We looked at a couple examples such as cassette tapes to CDs, and from walking in the mall to digital shopping. And when you guys were able to create your own invention, the thought process to creating that was how you were going to create it, why, and what the benefits were. And when we start watching this video, I want you guys to pay attention to why they created a lot of their inventions. During this video, write 3 or more inventions that were created in Mesopotamia.
I think I'll tell the story of my people from the very beginning. My grandfather knows all about it. He says the first thing we Sumerians did was get really good at farming. My ancestors used to make their living by hunting wild animals for food. They were constantly on the move following the herds. As they traveled, they would also gather wild berries, nuts, and greens to eat. But they often didn't know where their next meal would come from. It was a hard way to live. Then they discovered they could plant and harvest a kind of wheat they found growing wild. And they also found out how to tame wild goats and sheep and raise them for food. Grandfather calls that domestication. It meant they didn't have to hunt for food anymore. They could grow it themselves. And so my ancestors stopped wandering and stayed here. They discovered that food grows better here than almost anywhere else. That's because we're in a river valley, right between 2 rivers, in fact. Mesopotamia actually means land between the rivers. One river is the Tigris, and the other is the Euphrates. My grandfather says it's easy to grow food in our valley because the soil here is so fertile. And he says that is because of the mountains up north. It snows a lot up there in the winter. When the snow melts, all that water runs down into the valley and into the rivers. Then the rivers rise over their banks and flood the valley, and they dump a lot of really good dirt on the land. It's great for growing food in. So now we eat really well. We grow barley and wheat, lots of beans and fresh vegetables, and fruits like melons, dates, apples, figs, and grapes. Our animals give us milk, cheese, and meat, and there are always plenty of fish in the rivers. When my ancestors first started farming here, their biggest problem was never knowing when a flood might come and wash away their crops. Even if the crops survived that, they might die in the summer when it's so hot and there's not enough water. But my people didn't give up. Instead, we actually invented a way to control the river. First, we learned how to build levees. Those are big piles of earth between the fields and the river. They're too tall for the river to get over, so they prevent the floods. Then we made gated ditches around the fields, and when the crops needed water in the summer, we would just open the gates and let some river water flow in. To plant our crops, we use a great tool called a plow. It's a Sumerian invention, and we use an ox to pull the plow, another of our great ideas. Some of our smartest people invented a calendar based on the moon and stars. My grandfather says nobody had ever thought of a way to measure time like that before. It helps us know when the floods will come. In our calendar, each year has 12 months, and each month has 30 days. Each month is represented by one of the constellations in the sky. They're called the zodiac. Our priests watch the zodiac to know which month it is. That way, they know when the floods from the mountains will arrive. We Sumerians also invented writing. My grandfather says that in the old days, nobody knew how to write. Well, if you can't write, how do you keep track of how many animals you sold last month? What are you supposed to do? Paint them on cave walls? No, we're much more modern here in Sumer. We figured out how to write on clay tablets. You just take a piece of reed and cut a stylus from it. That's a sort of hard, pointed tool. You press the point into some wet clay, and pretty soon you're writing. Our style of writing is called cuneiform. With writing, you can keep records of everything you do. It's great because then you don't have to remember it all. You also can make things permanent when you write them down. For example, we were the first people to write down our laws. But this is maybe the best thing we invented: the wheel. You'd think somebody back in the old days would have thought of it sooner, but we were the first. Before carts and wheels, we used to just drag things around. That was hard. But like I said, we're very modern here in Sumer.
And during this time, I want you guys to have a class discussion of what were some of the inventions that you saw in the video. You can put that in the chat box. Nice job, you guys. And I want to introduce to you guys what some of the first in Mesopotamia, some of the first inventions and the civilization. So here you see a picture of the Sumerians. Sumer were the first city in Mesopotamian. Here you have city-state. They built city-states around the water, as you can see, where they have walls to prevent the flooding. And the wheel, it was made out of bronze. You have the levees, which is the irrigation system. You have the zodiac sign, which they used this zodiac sign to determine when it was going to snow and melt. Also mathematics, take a look at this. It looks very similar to the Roman numerals, right? You see the 1 where it only has 1 mark, 2 where it has 2 marks. It's pretty interesting. And this right here is a stone, and on this stone it stands 7 feet tall, 2 feet wide. This is a very interesting piece from Mesopotamia because all their laws were written on here. So from here to here, all their laws are written all around there. So it's really interesting. You guys get to learn some of that later on. And when they created the wheel, they also created chariots. And you will see that within some of the civilizations during the wars, they will advance these chariots by putting metal pieces on it, making them lighter. And they also created the boat, which is made by papyrus. It is a plant, and they would use the boats to trade and travel large items. And this was a great tool for them to move products around and learn new things from different areas. So the 3 innovations that I want us to focus on today, first one is farming. So when we took a look at farming, we saw the mountain snow that would flood in that area. And instead of pushing them away, the flood pushing them away, it actually kept them there. And the reason why is because they were able to produce an abundance of food, a lot of food. And to do that, they created levees, which is a wall built along a river to prevent floods. So these were irrigation system where they dug ditches, and when they dug these ditches and when it flooded, all the water went in it to actually trap them in these ditches here, which is pretty smart. Then you have the plow. They created the plow, a farming tool to break up tools. So you see here, the sharp object here was the part where it went into the soil. And this part here was attached to a cow. And this is what it would look like. So civilizations depended on farming, which created surplus, a lot of food. And then when you have so much food to feed everybody, what is everybody going to do, right? They started creating jobs, just different types of jobs in that city, so that everybody will have a purpose. The second innovation we'll talk about is city-states. City-state is a city with surrounding areas that make up an independent nation with its own army, currency, and leaders. So let's take a look at one of the city in Mesopotamia. So as you can see, they built the wall around this city, okay? And inside of it, they have their own army, their own currency, their own leaders. So over here in this space over here, you can tell that there is a place for the king and a place for probably the priest, and there's ziggurat here. And I want to take at a modern day example. Take a look at Singapore. So Singapore is located here on South Asia, and we're over here. And when we take a look at Singapore, you might remember Singapore from Crazy Rich Asians. And in 1965, Singapore became an independent country where they formed their own government, its own currency, a full and highly trained armed forces. Just imagine you going into Benson and there was a new law, new government, new army, and a new leader there, like a new king. But then when you step into Dunn, it's the same thing. There's a new king, new laws, new currency. So those are city-states. The third one we'll talk about is cuneiform. Cuneiform is the system of writing, an earliest form of writing from ancient Mesopotamia. So they use cuneiform to send messages, to communicate, and we use writing to communicate too. But for them, they use it in a different form. They use it on clay tablet and they use stylus. Here you see in this artifact, it is ancient Mesopotamians were the first civilization to record their laws, okay? And then here is a bill of sale. This is a transaction from the last days of Sumerian history. It is the sale of a piece of land to his brother. It kind of tells a sale that one brother is selling his land to the other brother, which is pretty interesting. So I want you guys to have a class discussion of how did innovations and inventions help the civilization in Mesopotamia become so successful.